In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, may His peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad and upon his holy, blessed progeny. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, brothers and sisters in faith in the Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the path of the true Islam, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Convertsation, the TV program that deals with the issues and problems or challenges that are faced in the daily lives of converts to the religion of Islam. Join me, Daniel Pizer, and my co-host, Sheikh Yahya Seymour, as we continue to discuss the subject of Aqidah, namely doctrine and belief, and the subject of how do converts, whether late into their conversion experience or early as new Muslims, of course, I guess we could say to the end of our lives, whether we like it or not, we'll certainly be viewed as new Muslims. But how do we distinguish and sift through information that at times can seem complex or overwhelming or confusing? Now, we discussed some things in the previous episode related to a tendency to get into scientific miracles in the Quran, or natural theology, or sort of pure rationalism in terms of our approach to religion and some of the pitfalls of these. It's certainly not to say that all rational argumentation is useless when it comes to religion, and certainly that can be a means of approach for some people. For instance, if we look in Al-Hadi or something, a text like that for someone who's a new Muslim can actually be very useful, particularly if you can find someone to teach it. That's the 11th chapter is the English title, and you can find it online. Likewise, other rationalist texts like the hadith of the English term is like it's a kind of cherry, right? Which is a famous hadith from Mufaddal, from al-Sadiq, where with the Indian medicine man or doctor, whatever, where he gets into describing sort of the miracle of creation and this kind of thing to convince someone who is an atheist to adopt correct religious views in the span of one conversation. However, as we're not the Imams, it's unlikely that most of us are gifted on that level that we can do something like that. So we come back to the issue of figuring out correct doctrine, particularly early in the conversion process, and it's something that's very important to focus on. Equally, if not more important, at once you've sort of squared away your salat and things like this, than many other aspects, because it's only with true faith, and that's something that we find in the Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Imams from his progeny, peace be upon them all, that outside of that, we can't really approach faith correctly. So one of the areas that can become very problematic in the beginning for converts, at least in my own experience, is a tendency, whether it's through online encounters or IRL, as they would say, in real life at centers. That's I used to be such a computer nerd, man. Like I had no social life because I spent all my time with computer stuff when I was growing up.
Was it you?
But today, man, I feel already completely out of touch. So that's about as like lingo-y as I can get. So converts may encounter, whether it's online or in practice, things related to what we could generally summarize as a mystical worldview. It goes under different titles, whether it's Irfan or Sufism or other things like this, that apart from, at least at the beginning, hopefully we'll get into this, apart from the correctness or incorrectness of those positions, is frequently really out of the depth of a new Muslim to begin reading into. Now, there's a lot of texts that new Muslims will encounter early on that either are very close to Sufism, for instance, or try to show some kind of alignment between Sufism and Shi'ism, or some kind of spiritual affinity between them, and others that simply borrow language from trends like this, which, if we look deeply into the narrations, and sometimes not even so deeply into the narrations of Ahlul Bayt, that we find, peace be upon them, that they have, including the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, repeatedly condemned Sufism by name, or condemned mysticism, or approaches that, in fact, seem very deep and spiritual, but in practice may actually be very shallow, because they don't come from the Imams. In fact, we find that they, in many cases, come from enemies of the prophetic household, sometimes very overt enemies of it. So, one of the things that I was hoping we could discuss in today's episode is this issue of not just correct doctrine, but doctrine, areas where doctrine becomes corrupted, where Aqidah becomes corrupted, and areas that converts early on may be tempted into exploring, but that we would strongly urge them not to not read about. But if you want to read about it as an academic exercise. Don't incorporate it into your faith. I don't ever want us to come across as being like Wahhabis, where we say, don't read this book, don't read that book, this book is by a deviant author, whatever else. The obligation to seek knowledge has a very general application as well. And so it's always good to know what other worldviews are, just like it's important to know what Christians believe or other things like this. It's important to know what other sects that claim the banner of Islam, what they believe as well.
If I could just
please jump in.
I think it's a very crucial topic you've introduced, and I understand there are certain sensitivities in discussing such things. People who are particularly partisan often dismiss such methodologies as either being an act of open disbelief, which I'm very keen to make clear I'm not saying here today. I'm not saying that to take from these guys is an act of open disbelief and will take you straight to hellfire. I'm not saying that people who do it have evil intentions. I'm not condemning the sincerity of a believer who tries to take from these paths. What I will say,
in the same way we wouldn't condemn people who follow the other straying sects, whether they call themselves Sunni or something else, that we might talk about even their leaders or other things like this. But certainly we don't want to have this sound like we're condemning the individual.
Of many of these aspects. Exactly. What I would say is that if you live in mountainous terrain and you experience very severe winters where you live, for example, you are not going to try and travel in such a region using a boat which is designed for seafaring. When the creator of the boat designed the boat, he had intended that the boat be designed for transcending upon the sea and transporting yourself over water. Likewise, the people who come up with certain mystical worldviews often premise their worldview upon false foundations, or foundations which are alien to the Ahlul Bayt. So for example, you have people that talk about taking wisdom from wherever you can, and indeed Amir al-Mu'mineen has said, take wisdom even if it comes to you from an apostate or a heretic, as is attributed to him. So some people come along and say, so this is proof that you can take wisdom from wherever you want. My question is, how did you know it was wisdom in the first place?
Exactly.
You must have an external standard by which you say, yes, this is wisdom. If that external standard is the words of the Ahlul Bayt, then you have no need for this secondary source from which you take wisdom. So someone might ask me, then what did Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam mean?
Did he not mean conventional wisdom in this sense?
Conventional wisdom. So for example, I am amongst my group of friends who happen to be kuffar and atheists. And I might be in a discussion and I'm getting heated in my discussion. One of my friends might remind me, Yahya, calm down. It's not good to be angry. That statement in and of itself, it's not good to be angry, is hikmah.
Exactly.
Do I need to go, okay, is he a good source for me to find this out? No, absolutely not, because I already have a source which tells me that. It's conventional wisdom.
In the same way, if someone teaches you your teacher's kafir, they say 2 + 2 = 4, you're not going to be like, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure about it.
Exactly, this is conventional knowledge. It's empirically tested knowledge. It's not like this special revelation which people claim, this special spiritual substance which people claim to take from deviants. Now, let's look at the reality here. We understand that much of the sources of this is universal. It's found in Hindu mysticism, it's found in Buddhist mysticism,
Christian
and
mysticism.
we believe that such mysticism is completely deviant of Ahlul Bayt, for often it calls people to things such as a radical asceticism, often known as monasticism, where one separates themselves from society, where one becomes enclosed and engulfed in their own weird, unique practices. Now I understand fully why the brothers are attracted to this. Sometimes it comes across in the most beautiful language.
Right.
But what I would say is it's filled with beautiful, glorious rhetoric and lacking in any substance whatsoever. And the reason I say it's lacking in any substance whatsoever is that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, if this was true substance to arriving at taqwa and God consciousness, then the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would have been the first to teach us.
We would have a whole section like Bahar or something, some collection of works that would be all about the mystical narrations of the Imams and this kind of thing.
The mystical narrations of the Imams, narrations which were intended for the people to follow. Why is it that when we turn back to these mystical manuals, we find reference made to people like Al-Ghazali, we find reference made to people like Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, such individuals who, when we refer back to their books, the first one, Al-Ghazali, states that if Allah Azza wa Jal wished to forgive Yazid, it is possible that Yazid may have repented.
Right, and that we should
why
never,
do you do la'an on
never
him?
curse Yazid. He even says that we shouldn't bring up the issue of Hussein because it leads people to dissenting and whatever else.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing.
So when we have such an individual like Al-Ghazali saying this, Al-Ghazali who says that we should never even mention what happened to Abu Abdullah, and we have the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt saying that remember what happened to Abu Abdullah, make sure that people never forget what happened to Abu Abdullah. What kind of tragedy is this when this is the source of mysticism? Surely if he was so mystical and these practices get you anywhere in life, we would have expected him to get such a basic doctrine correct.
Absolutely.
Someone like Ibn Arabi, when we refer back to his books, let's forget the issues which we consider to be true and the Ahlul Bayt have taught us are true, such as the enemies of Allah Azza wa Jal, who our friends from the Ahlul Sunnah believe are good people. Let's take someone they agree is an evil person, a zindiq, a heretic, Hajjaj, Ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, the bloodthirsty tyrants. We find Ibn Arabi in his books praising such an individual. We find Ibn Arabi in his books, he states that, and I know there is some discussion that his books have been distorted, but if that is the case, then why is it these same distorted books that they're writing commentaries on? And I'm talking about the Shia who do this too. We find Ibn Arabi states, when he went on a spiritual ascension, his own version of a Mi'raj, he saw the name of Imam Ali alayhi salam written on the arsh underneath the names of the three tyrants of the Ahlul Sunnah. And so when he met Imam Ali, he asked him, how dare you have claimed, how did you dare to claim that you were of a higher position than them when I saw your name written below their names? These things, which when we come to read them, we understand that what kind of spirituality is this? They may have come with some decent things, yes, just as we find that, for example, someone like Adolf Hitler, the bloodthirsty tyrant who was responsible for World War II, may have been a very good administrator. We might be able to learn good tactics of how to reconcile a powerful government from him. But at the same time, we're not going to be taking any wisdom from such a person in anything other than that one thing he was good at.
And certainly not spiritual guidance.
And certainly we will not be praising him and elevating him and making excuses and saying that all these other statistics are merely fabrications. Unfortunately, we as a community need to learn that when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt, they are a particular group of people who we would never tolerate that they be belittled. What I mean by that is, say for example, and I'm going to give a tangible example because many of our brothers and sisters who are from the community are from the nation of Iraq. Say for example your parents were killed by Saddam Hussein in cold-blooded murder, and so were much of your family, that your life was ruined as a result of this. And I would come along in a few years' time and say, no, look, you know, this guy who is praising Saddam Hussein, he's a good guy, I'm going to take my religion from him. Saddam may have made a few mistakes.
And the parts where he praises him, maybe someone added that later.
Maybe someone just added that to his books. No one would ever accept this. Why? Because it's something so dear to us, something so beloved to us. Now, for me to come along and say that this individual who praises the enemies of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who belittles Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm going to take my spirituality from him. I ask the convert, you used your rationality to arrive at the school of Ahlul Bayt.
Yeah.
Does your rationality allow you to accept such arguments?
Well, it's not just even this, because I don't know how many converts necessarily will encounter, say, Ibn Arabi or Ghazali directly.
It's a new trend, Sheikhna. There's a new trend among Shiism to think it's
Sure.
cool to lean towards Sufism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to me is undisputed, unfortunately. What I was making reference to is more that even many of the books, and unfortunately some from Shi'i scholars, sometimes very famous ones, borrow heavily from the ideas in these in a way that someone may not perceive, or even if they say, okay, fine, so we're not going to take from someone like Ibn Arabi because he's Nasibi or something else, that at the same time they see some other big scholars' book that also borrows ideas from this or concepts that...
Golden rule. Any scholar, no matter which school of thought he's from, unless he backs what he says 100% from the words of Ahlul Bayt, then his saying has no authority.
Absolutely. I think that actually, now that you've put it this way, this is probably the best standard. However, what I am disappointed by, and I think probably a lot of converts are, and we can cover this more, we have a few minutes till break, inshallah we can cover it more after that, maybe if we don't have enough time, is that frequently when converts ask questions about religious beliefs or practices, they're not met with sufficient responses. In other words, the people they're asking are probably not used to being asked these questions.
Sure.
Like, what is the basis for us praying on turba, or what is the basis for us doing these other things, particularly things that may seem at variance with the majority population that claims the title of Islam for themselves. So they would like some kind of dalil, some kind of evidence to back this up.
Sure.
Particularly if they come from backgrounds like myself, or maybe you as well, or others, where they feel like they have been let down by religion in the past for this very reason, that they want to know, what is the evidence? Who said
basis.
this? Yeah. What, fine. So we have to do X, Y, and Z. Who said that? And show me where. If we say this now, a lot of converts, what we're met with sometimes is either polite condescension about, well, listen, our scholars, they know best, and you don't need to worry about this, just refer to their books, or something more hostile, like a variation of what, you don't trust our scholars, that they're able to do this. The matter is not about whether we trust the scholar or not.
So you converted yesterday, you think you already know more than the scholar.
This is not the issue of like... of like the dividing the birds on the different mountains just to gain certainty from God or something. We're talking about that it's a valid thing for someone to want to know, okay, fine, I need to do this, or I should believe in this, but why?
And more than often, if they would just tell us, look, in Wasa'il al-Shia, there's a whole bab or a whole chapter, which encompasses 19 narrations saying that the Imams used to do this and the importance of it.
Yeah.
Most of the converts would not even ask, are they sahih, are they daif? They would just go, fine, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to know.
Absolutely. So I think this is really hit home for me. If I, for instance, write, one thing that was important for me is if I wrote to even a marja's office,
sure, and
I would ask for a ruling about a particular issue, or I would say, is this permissible or not, I would also usually include the question, why or why not?
Sure. You were saying with the office of Sayyid Sadiq Shirazi, you found them to be quite helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. With Sayyid Sadiq Shirazi's office, and I would hope with other offices
even
as well.
Even Al-Hawza, I found them to be quite...
Yeah, if you go and push and ask for evidence for something, or if you have a knowledgeable wakil or representative of a marja, or just someone who's very well versed in the narrations of the imams, that they'll be able to provide answers for you. Unfortunately, sometimes the responses we get are designed to kind of shut us down and not ask questions about these things. And I think that can be very damaging early on.
Sure.
And prevents people from accessing proper guidance.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we'll have to hold the rest of the conversation until after the break. Please continue to stay tuned for this episode of The Conversation. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you can email us or contact us at the information provided on screen. Thank you for rejoining us on this episode of The Conversation as we discuss the issue of Aqidah and doctrine, beliefs of the true faith, the religion of Islam, the religion of Shi'ism, and the Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. We were discussing before we left for break the subject of mysticism and Islamic mysticism, and the way that converts sometimes may encounter this early on, and it can seem very appealing as a way for spiritual self-reform or development. And in fact, that this is probably something that converts either ought to stay away from early on in their conversion, just because of the potential to misunderstand certain aspects of these texts or of derivative works of other scholars, or something that we may find more problems with further down the road in terms of developing correct spirituality, and saying that the best yardstick for whether something is a correct source of spiritual guidance is by returning to the sources of the only valid sources of spiritual guidance, which is of course the Prophet and his blessed daughter Fatima, and the pure Imams from the progeny of Al-Hadi and Fatima Zahra, peace be upon them all. When we talk about the subject of Islamic mysticism, people may also come up with the excuse that, it seems like a very beneficial thing, and don't we want to be more spiritual, or should we not be more spiritual people? And may mention, for instance, that maybe they've taken part in some kind of group dhikr sessions or other things like this. And they felt like they had some sort of real spiritual benefit from that. And I guess when I think about how to respond to people, because it's very difficult to say you didn't feel the way that you felt. I mean, obviously, yeah, you felt like it gave you some benefit, inshallah, maybe it did give you some benefit. But I think, and hopefully you'd agree, that the main question is not whether or not you gain some apparent benefit from it. I mean, people benefit from deals with the devil as well, I'm sure, but that whether or not it is the correct religious approach, not just in terms of doctrine, but sometimes in terms of practice as well, or a lot of times we find people saying, well, I'm Shi'i Sufi or something like this. And how do we begin to approach this issue? And what, I guess another way to ask it is, what is the subject of Irfan according to Ahlul Bayt? And what is Irfan according to Ahlul Bayt versus sources outside of this that try to mix how it would be defined in a true Imami sense with something that comes from the outside? And also, I think it's worth asking, perhaps you can shed some light on this, Shaykh, the issue of the sources for a lot of these beliefs that come in through Sufism or other things that are frequently imported, in fact, from un-Islamic belief systems.
It's a handful of objects we have to deal with here, but very crucial questions.
And all in 20 minutes.
I think
maybe 15.
There are many things that we have all encountered in our lives, and I don't like to get my hands dirty and discuss these things, but for the sake of our converts and also our youth in general, it's not an issue affecting converts. Converts wouldn't be exposed to these things if it weren't for the fact that many of our youth are already into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to engage with this, and I do make clear to the brothers and sisters that I don't like to engage in these topics. I think that often polemics brings a lot more heat than it does light, and we wish to bring people away from the heat, namely away from the fire, and not bring them closer to any heat in this life, at least. The question that was put forward by Shaikh Daniel was those who claim that they have partaken in rituals, namely group dhikr, or spiritual practices from the Sufis, sometimes invoke the fact that they had a unique experience when they did so. They invoke the fact that they felt amazing, that it was an experience that they found that no other act of ibadah within the realm of tashayyu could bring them. I sometimes believe that this is true to a degree, but at the same time I do not believe that they're in a position to mention this. For many of our brothers and sisters, unfortunately, and this is also due to a problem of availability, and I do blame our community, for our scholars not translating these texts, or there being a lack of resources amongst ourselves. We have not made the rawayat and the du'as of the Ahlul Bayt available. There are so many books of du'a available from the school of the Ahlul Bayt, from the Islam which was revealed by Allah to the Holy Prophet, which if we go to the Arabic bookshops here in Karbala, we will find them all over the place. There's not only Mafatih al-Jinan as people think, there's not only Sahifa Sajadiyya, but even though we have Sahifa Sajadiyya in the English language, which is a brilliant translation, we find that this book has remained mavloom.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
book is completely untouched, and people often will a lot more refer back to a book like Mafatih al-Jinan. Yet, that being said, how do we engage with this topic of I had an amazing experience, or it was truly amazing? Sometimes, if I were to base my religion on experiences, then the kind of spiritual experiences I've had in Christian churches are pretty much uncomparable to some degree. The only thing that probably compares is the spiritual experiences I've had when I've been at the masajid of, for example, the grave of Imam Hussein, such as the shrine here, or the grave of Sayyidah Zainab, the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab in Syria. So am I endorsing going to church and having these experiences? Absolutely not. I had those experiences whilst I was still in a time of Jahiliyyah and believed in the Christian faith myself.
Likewise, a lot of people have very profound spiritual experiences using hallucinogenic drugs.
Absolutely. So we ask the question, does an experience validate anything? When we look at the numerous cults of the world, the Jim Jones People's Temple theology, in which he led a mass group of people in the late 1970s or early 80s, I forget, to create a unique village of peace, prosperity, and love in Guyana, known as Jonestown. This cultic leader, who had a mass following, who felt that he brought them to the nearest, closest spiritual experiences and liberated them from the clutch of material world, they drank Kool-Aid at his request and brought themselves to their own suicide due to his charismatic spiritual effects. We cannot deny that there are certain spiritual effects upon people. Even, for example, within my mother's side of the family, we have people in the Philippines who carry out acts of self-flagellation, claiming it has amazing spiritual benefits in the name of venerating and remembering the crucifixion of Jesus. These things exist in every community. Now, if we were to take the truth claim of every single one of them seriously, then I think if each of us, starting from the age of 15, for the rest of our life on a daily basis would test out each one, we would not complete the set of spiritual practices available which are claimed to give these experiences prior to our death, assuming we have a healthy life of up to 90 years old with no complication. So we understand that all groups have these claims, and yet many of these claims cannot be linked to the truth necessarily because they exist in all religions.
But it seems that one of the problems with particular, we would say mystically oriented groups, or sort of Gnostically oriented, is that they tend to also claim special knowledge about God and about creation or the Creator, or special access to Him. And this is one of the things I think that makes them somewhat unique, because it's not simply a matter of a spiritual practice anymore. It's saying that there's a special type of spiritual knowledge that the layperson then does not have access to, that the either spiritual pole of that group or a spiritual leader of that group can initiate someone into this kind of knowledge in ways that essentially are pale imitations of the Imams and their companions.
This is something that needs to be addressed again and grabbed by the horns. We have two types of mysticism. One which delves a lot into philosophical terminology and will often claim that its opponents, or those who are merely critically analyzing it, do not understand such thoughts because they have not studied this science for about 10 years.
And this is the most common response, actually, is, well, you haven't studied this, this, and this, or you haven't read this book, or you haven't spiritually evolved into a position where you can, your heart's not ready to understand these profound truths. So how could you understand and thus refute any of these arguments?
I present inshallah ta'ala, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for assistance in conveying these things, because I believe they're very important, and I believe that this is one of the causes which we are losing a substantial amount of convert brothers and sisters too, as well as young members of our community in general. And we pray that everyone remains upon the wala of Ahlul Bayt and does not take into the walaya of every snake and deviant caller to himself. We find that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the greatest of all of creation, when he was sent to his people, he did not come to them and tell them, "Oh people, oh my people, I come to you with a 10-year prerequisite course in philosophical terminology so that you might understand Tawheed." He did not tell them, "Oh my people, you are a filthy group of people and you need to embrace these unique spiritual practices which will enlighten you and bring you to a higher understanding of God's purpose." When we look at, for example, the people who, according to pure Islamic theology, we believe are the greatest of individuals after the Imams and the Prophets, we say they are the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So for us to say that someone has not reached the level of ma'rifah because they have not been engaged in these spiritual disciplines of purifying the soul, we need to ask ourselves, does that mean that you're saying that they would reach a higher status? That is certainly what they're saying.
Yeah.
These people have a higher status than other believers. Did Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, that man who prior to being forgiven and prior to repenting had brought the armies of Yazid to encounter Al-Hussein, the master of martyrs, was this man a man who was engaged in spiritual discipline? There are companions of Hussein alayhi salam who are known as Uthmani. Uthmani meaning what? People did not recognize the caliphate of Amir al-Mu'mineen, even according to contemporary Sunni standards. People who used to curse Amir al-Mu'mineen and were upon the madhab of the Umayyads. Such individuals were they also highly elite spiritual discipline? Absolutely not. We need to be people of intellect, brothers and sisters. We need to make sure that we are verifying, that we are cross-checking everything we claim with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Now, I know that there are some out there who might come to me and say, "Do you really think that Scholar X did not think about this? Do you know more than Scholar X?" No. By God, I don't claim to know more than Scholar X, just as I don't claim to know more than Richard Dawkins or Stephen Hawking's about biology, yet that does not put me into a position where I now have to submit to everything they say about the reality of the universe.
Precisely.
Because they now claim that there is no God and happen to be more qualified than me in the natural sciences. We need to be people who are able to look back to the Ahlul Bayt and use them as a critical standard by which we judge everything up against. Now, as I will regurgitate what I've been saying again and again, because I want this to be held in the minds of our brothers and sisters. We are in desperate need of differentiating between someone who is a scholar and a Shia and holds such beliefs, and someone whose beliefs organically stem from what the Imams have said due to Shiism. Someone can be a Shia scholar and still be influenced by these beliefs. We're all fallible human beings. I'm sure there are certain beliefs I hold in my life, maybe be it about politics, be it about gender, which might even be in contradiction to what the Ahlul Bayt have said. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would guide me and guide all the mu'mineen in all those aspects which I say other than what Ahlul Bayt have said. Yet it doesn't mean just because I say it and I happen to be Shia that this view is now from the Ahlul Bayt.
Exactly. I think that's an important distinction to make. You know, I mean, I don't want converts also to run in the opposite end of this. And as you mentioned before, this can be kind of an issue where it generates, as usually, a lot of heat and not a lot of light. A good way to put it. I don't want to drive people to the opposite end and then say that, you know, just because some of these beliefs or practices may be problematic, or that they derive from something other than Ahlul Bayt, that people involved in this, or scholars who promote this, or have some affinity with it, are like satanic in some sense, or whatever else.
As the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and the Imams have reaffirmed this, verily actions are judged by intentions. We believe that most of the people who promote this even have good intentions, albeit they are misguided in their actions. In regards to, sorry, I'm afraid that the time will run out on me, so I want to...
Well, I was just, the last thing I was going to make is that I think it's always important that we make a distinction between people and beliefs, and that someone may be Shia, they may be a scholar, they may not be, they could be a lay person, but that we make a distinction between a person and their beliefs and actions, and that people are indeed fallible, that we make mistakes, or we may stray into other areas, you know. I hope God protects me from straying now in my life as I've strayed in the past, and I hope that He protects me from straying in the future, but it's always a possibility, you know, and it's in a way frequently that you wouldn't necessarily know it. So I don't want to drive people to this other side where they get into sort of this like takfiri mindset and start saying like, this person's a disbeliever, this person's going to hell, whatever, and essentially assuming the role of God on the throne here.
If
I would, caution people against that.
Quickly, something I'm afraid that time will run out on me, so I want to cover as many points as possible, inshallah ta'ala. I know that some brothers will raise the fact that with the Sufis, they're a much more peaceful, loving aspect of the Islamic community, and hence they want to affiliate themselves with that side. That's one aspect of Sufism. We see that in Chechnya, some of the fiercest Wahhabi Mujahideen were affiliated with Sufism. Here in Iraq, where we happen to be studying right now, we find that one of the fiercest anti-Shi'i, anti-non-Sunni groups out there is a militant militia formed up of Naqshbandi Sufis. Now, speaking of the Naqshbandis is another important point, another polemic which is sometimes brought up by the brothers who, out of their sincerity, try to demonstrate that Sufism must come from Ahlul Bayt. We will be told that out of all the Sufi silsilas of the world, all the chains of transmission of Sufism in the world, with the exception of one, all of them go back to Amir al-Mu'mineen, demonstrating again that there's an intrinsic link between Shiism and Sufism. The response to this, dear brothers and sisters, is that we cannot accept every claim at face value. Wahhabi ulama are also muhaddithin. They also have a similar silsila going back to individuals. Every silsila they have goes back to the Holy Prophet. So we also believe in the Holy Prophet. Are we going to now say that what they must be preaching has an intrinsic link with Shiism too? Absolutely not. More importantly, even if we were to take this argument at face value, let's go further beyond the Prophet Muhammad. Every religion in the world claims to be from God.
Precisely.
So are we now going to say that it all must come from God just because they say it does?
That does seem to be the solution for some people.
That seems to be the solution for some people. Completely distorted solution. Brothers and sisters, we need to return to the Ahlul Bayt. We need to make sure that the Ahlul Bayt are the crux of everything we do in our lives. And we need to make sure that we are ensuring such through following the words of the Ahlul Bayt as were preserved by the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, and not the followers of those who oppressed the Ahlul Bayt and the governments which established the oppression of the Ahlul Bayt.
I think, you know, it's good you brought up the followers of them, and it's something we can get into more, inshallah, in future episodes, because they're always a source of guidance and inspiration. But you certainly do find that some companions were maybe privy to some higher levels of knowledge than other companions, related either to the Imam's status as a being or in some other spiritual aspects. However, not in the sense that people would think of frequently the type of mysticism that we're talking about. You know, unfortunately, we're down to the last minute now, so I have to say goodbye for both of us. Inshallah, you'll continue joining us for future episodes of The Conversation as we continue to discuss issues related to Aqidah and correct doctrine and belief on the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.